Je me a annoncé donc la proposition du président de la République française de mettre l'Internet au menu du prochain G20, ce qui est quand même une vraie révolution. Vous avez évoqué les questions de cybersécurité, de cybercriminalité, et sur ce point, Steven Erlinger, je crois que nous avons dans la salle un invité de choix.
Merci,
Oui.
Ulysse. First, thank you to the translators. I know you're working hard. I'll try to speak slowly. It seems to me one of the things that's clear here is that the internet is an enormous challenge to sovereignty. We're trying to talk about governance, but in fact it undermines governance. And if we look at the other main topic of this conference, which has been the financial crisis, we can see very quickly how slow an instrument governments are. They don't react quickly. They don't, in the end, keep up with the markets. The best people don't always go in to our regulatory agencies. Mm-hmm. And we have the same problem here. You have, as we heard last night, 900 billion internet users in China, but they can't see anything that they want to see. We know China is selling internet blocking software to Iran. Governments are struggling to control what's out there. We know that Al-Qaeda communicates with its cells through the internet, through Hotmail, through Google Mail, through coded messages. How do we control this? So it seems to me we really do need, if we're talking about governance and governments, and perhaps here I'm speaking as an American, we do need to think and perhaps talk a little more about how vulnerable we are and the question of cyber war and cyber security. We saw it with Estonia. We saw it a bit with Georgia. We are very vulnerable. Things can be shut down very quickly. So I think we're also very lucky. We have in the audience the former American Secretary for Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, who's obviously spent quite a lot of time worrying about these questions. So I arranged with him, I hope you don't mind, before we go to questions, just to tell us for a few minutes his own worries and experiences. So Michael, if you wouldn't mind, and if we can get him a microphone. There you are.
Oui.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for letting me intervene. As you know, we've been looking at the issue of cybersecurity in the United States for a number of years. And starting in 2007, 2008, a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy was put together, which was launched under the prior administration and continues forward under the current administration. Broadly speaking, there are three challenges, security challenges that we face on the internet. One is, of course, the issue of cybercrime. People are well aware of that. The dimensions are enormous. We've had thefts of literally tens of millions of credit card numbers and a huge impact on people. Beyond that, there's economic espionage and state espionage. There are enormous quantities of data that are stolen. Now, everybody knows about the Google attack earlier this year, but that is only one example of the kind of economic impact this has on our businesses and on our governments. But the third, and I think, issue, which I think in some ways is the most disturbing, is the one that Steve talked about, and that is the issue of cyber attacks or cyber warfare. Estonia in 2007 suffered a denial of service attack. There were cyber attacks surrounding what happened in Georgia in 2008. There have been stories in the paper recently about a worm that appears to attack control systems in certain kinds of Siemens machinery, and that underscores the danger of an attack that wouldn't merely overwhelm a network, but would actually destroy a network, and one that might manage critical infrastructure. So we're facing a circumstance in which the internet allows people to potentially have a catastrophic destructive effect, not only on the internet itself, but on the real-world systems that depend on the internet. And here's the challenge. I think Craig was correct in talking about the asymmetry, the fact that the kind of destruction that used to be reserved for a nation state now can be carried out by a group or even an individual with sufficient capability. But the same principle also creates a problem of attribution. In other words, we don't know necessarily who carries out an attack or who was the cause of the attack. Often the attack is mounted through third parties, through servers that are hijacked by people for their own purposes. We've had circumstances where there is a suspicion that a government has launched an attack, but the government denies it and says, well, it's just a bunch of kids or a bunch of people acting on their own. And this makes it very difficult to raise the kind of regime of governance that we're used to, for example, in the arms area or in the area of space. In the, quote, good old days of the Cold War, we knew who the actors were who would carry out a nuclear attack, and we built a doctrine and a series of international rules that governed what would happen in the area of nuclear arms and yielded a very stable environment. The problem is, because of the asymmetry, we cannot do that with the same ease in cyberspace. And so the question I really put to the panel is this. There are some people who are skeptical about the idea of doing any kind of international agreement on cyber warfare. Their belief is that it's unverifiable, that a country can sign up to an agreement and can simply deny that they're actually violating the agreement. And there are people who believe that, given the prevalence of espionage on the internet, that there's not going to be sufficient interest. Others believe, and I put myself in this category, that one probably can reach some agreement on some areas that all countries would view as off-limits for cyber warfare. For example, destroying our global financial system, which would hurt everybody. But then again, the question is, how do you police it? Who has the responsibility to make sure that the servers in one's own country aren't used for attacks? What do we do if a country is incapable of managing its own domain, and therefore can other countries come in and defend themselves? So there are a lot of complicated questions, and the challenge or the question I raised for the panel is, what do you see as the future of this kind of international arms control regime in the context of cyberspace?